Hello everyone, VanguardOfValor here, and welcome to a new adventure. Yes indeed, we are trying to play Dwarf Fortress today, although it's going to take us a little while to actually get started. Yes indeed. This first episode is probably going to be mostly about that first step. We're not even going to really get into the game, but we're going to get started, so that's good enough for now. Now, in case you're wondering why we're not actually in the game right now, it's because this game is a little bit, let's just say, obtuse. It's not exactly the easiest thing to get into, the graphic style leaves a lot to be desired and is very, very hard to understand, and really the game just doesn't do anything to try and explain to you what's going on. So this is going to be somewhat of a tutorial explanation of how to get into the game as well as the game itself. What we see on screen here, this little panel right here, is the key, the ticket for you to get into this game. This is the easy way into a very complicated game. The Lazy Newb Pack is aptly titled. If you're looking for it on Google, Lazy Newb Pack should find it for you, and if not, just stick a Dwarf Fortress on that search bar as well, and you should find it without too much trouble. Well, the reason it's so great is it gives you the opportunity to tweak a bunch of little options. It gives you some graphics options, it gives you some utilities as well, and basically makes your life a lot easier. Also, for the remainder of this video, if you haven't done it already, you're probably going to want to watch this on full screen if you can, and maybe set it to you having high definition video. That's the word I was looking for, because otherwise you're going to have a really hard time reading all the text. There's not a whole lot I can do about that. The game just likes little text. So, what do we got going on here? Well, we have some options. We're going to go through all these different menus, all these different options here in the Lazy Newb Pack, so we know what we're getting into, what we have to set up to actually get our game working. Then we're going to go into the game. In this episode, we're going to talk about creating our world. We're going to find somewhere to get started, and that's probably all we're going to have time for this episode. But we'll give it a look, and we'll see how far we get. So, for our options here, they're fairly self-explanatory, but we're going to go over them and why not you'd want to have them turned on. First off, here we have our population cap. Population cap determines, surprise surprise, the maximum number of dwarves you can have in your fort. So we have it set to 200 at the moment, which is a fairly reasonable number. It's what it starts at as default. You can set it higher or lower, but if you set it higher, you risk running into problems with lag later on. You have 1,000 dwarves in your fort. And if you set it lower, you might have a hard time getting everything done, because you just won't have as many dwarves as you otherwise might have. So, what else do we have here? We have a child cap, which determines the ratio of children in your fort. So, right now it's set to 1 to 10, 1 child to 10 adults. And that seems fairly reasonable. You can set it lower or higher as well, but you might have a hard time doing something if your workforce is, 10 times children to every 1 adult. Next on the list here we have temperature. Now temperature is a fairly important thing in this game because as it gets hotter and colder, things change. As it gets colder, you can have things like the winter happening and you can have all of your water freeze. As it gets hotter, you can have things like lava around that can actually melt resources, and if you have materials that are, say, made of wood or, low density, low heat, I don't forget what the word for that, low melting point stones, you may actually find your things melting or bursting into flame. So that's definitely something we want to watch out for, but we are going to turn it on because it's a big element in this game. We're also going to go down here to weather. Weather is going to be on. That determines whether or not it's going to rain or snow or what have you in the environments we're in. Invaders determines whether or not we're going to have things like the goblin hordes attacking us, and that is a big part of the game, so we're definitely leaving that turned on. If you turn that off, the game gets kind of boring. There's not a whole lot that can go wrong. Invaders is definitely something to have turned on. Cave-ins basically determines whether or not physics affects the actual areas in your map. So, example, if you were to mine out a circle of ground so it's literally floating up in the air, will it stay there? The answer is, well, no. If you have the cave-ins turned on, it'll collapse down to the layer below, causing widespread damage if there's anything down there. So we're going to leave that turned on and hope we don't accidentally cause any cave-ins, but that's probably pretty unlikely. We can come down here to liquid depth, and liquid depth is a very useful thing as well. That shows you on a number of 1 to 7 how much water there is in a certain spot. If it's very low, like 1 layer of water, I believe your dwarves can just run across it. But if it's set to 7, you might run into some problems if, say, an entire floor of your fort gets filled with level 7 water. Not exactly good. Varied ground here is just an aesthetic thing. It determines whether a big flat area of ground will have any details in it that'll help spread it out. It won't change the actual surface in any way, but it'll make it look a little bit more different, which is definitely nice, especially when we have our graphics options, which we're going to get to in a minute. Starting labors basically determines what labors are turned on at the beginning, which doesn't mean much to you yet, but that's okay. We'll get there in a moment. Just leave it on skills. Doesn't really make much of a difference. Now this one down here is the killer one, the aquifers. You can leave them on if you want, and it will fill up a lot of your map with areas which have aquifers in them, and an aquifer is an entire layer of a map that is full of water, full of infinite water, which means if you break into it, it's going to spew water everywhere and probably flood your fort. So, they're a lot of trouble to deal with, and for now, I'm just going to turn them off. so we can find some places that don't have them and we don't have to deal with that particular issue, because that is a pretty nasty one, and for now we'll just better off without it. Otherwise, we'd be looking for somewhere on the map that doesn't have an aquifer, and it makes things a lot more difficult to actually find our location. So we'll deal with that object later on, probably. For now, we'll deal without it. And key bindings are fine as they are. As we come down here to our graphics options, well, this gives us the opportunity to make this game playable. It starts off with the ASCII default, and they are a mess to look at. It's basically the entire game is made up of nothing but what is on your keyboard. And that's fine, except it's a mess to look at sometimes. So what we're going to look at down here is the Phoebus Pack. It is a fantastic graphical compilation pack. Oh, words, why do you thwart me? A nice graphical compilation pack that makes things a lot more accessible, a lot more easy to understand, and a lot more just appealing. So we're going to turn this on by clicking on it and then hitting Install Graphics. It'll ask us if we want to change the settings and if we want to update any save games, even if we don't have any yet. And it will update them all for us, and there we go. We now have the Phoebus Pack installed, which you'll be able to see shortly, making the game much nicer to look at. We also want to set true type fonts to yes, especially if we change the texture pack, because this basically means that we have actual font instead of letter tiles, which the game originally has, which is a lot more difficult to read, especially if we change the graphic pack to one that's a little even less easy to read, because it would be hard to read, say, a series of trees. Anyway, in our utilities, there's 3 here to begin with. There are some other ones in the more advanced Lazy Newb Pack. We don't need those. Those are just hacks, basically. Dwarf Therapist, though, is the big one. Dwarf Therapist is a big time saver, big convenience tool, so we will be using this because it makes life a lot just more easy. Not easy, but a lot more reasonable, because changing the things in your dwarfs normally is a pain in the butt, but with this tool it's a lot more accessible. Our advanced options have some of the more finicky things in it. We can turn off our FPS counter because we don't really need that turned on. You can turn the sound on if you like, but I find that there's only one song in the game and it gets a little bit repetitive. I generally turn the sound off and do things like listen to YouTube videos or, you know, TV or something like that while I'm playing. So that is an option for you. What we're listening to now is actually music from Incompetech, nothing to do with Dwarf Fortress, which will be linked in the description below, but that's how it generally goes. We have the intro movie turned off, although if you decide to play this for yourself and get this pack for yourself, definitely turn the intro movie on and watch it at least once so you can see what you're missing. It's certainly something, let's just say that. Now we can look down here, we can change the option between windowed and full screen mode. We're going to leave it on windowed because we want to be able to move between this and our Dwarf Therapist if we can, all that good stuff. As far as save options go, we're going to set the autosave to no, initial save to no as well, because the game is a little bit, let's just say, CPU intensive when it saves, and has a tendency to completely crash the game if it's trying to do anything at the same time. It doesn't break the game, it just freezes up, and I don't really want to have to deal with that while we're recording, so I'm just not going to turn the seasonal saves and whatnot on, although you may want to have them on in case anything happens while you're playing. You do, however, want to have pause on save and pause on load turned on, because that determines whether or not the game just sort of dumps you into the action as soon as you start up a game or as soon as a save unfreezes, and it's generally nice to be able to have a second or two to get your bearings after it has just come out of being frozen or you've just loaded the game, so those are generally good. Compressing saves is generally good because it means you actually have smaller save files, and backing up saves doesn't really matter. If you want to have a backup copy, go for it, but I don't generally feel the need. We also set our processor priority here so that we can decide how much our processor can work on this game. We're going to leave it on normal for now because that's all it really needs. And that is through all of our options. So finally, we can actually get into this game. Let's play Dwarf Fortress! And even now, we won't really get to play it yet. But that's okay. We have more to do first. So let's look here. What do we got? We got a big black screen. Nothing rich to look at, but it will be more interesting soon. I promise you. Eventually, the game does actually get moving, but there's a lot to get into before we can get there. So this is, of course, Slaves to Armok, God of Blood, Chapter 2, Dwarf Fortress, Histories of Greed and Dynamism. So, Dwarf Fortress is only like a subtitle here, but this is really what this game is called, was referred to, and what it's all about. It's about the Dwarf Fortressing. And this histories thing changes every time you load up the game, so there's always a different little histories thing going on there. It's made by, down here, Bay 12 Games, and programmed by Tart Adams and designed by him and Zach Adams, which has made quite a pretty good thing here for just the two of them. Now, what else have we got going on here? We got a couple options. We got Create New World, Design New World with Advanced Parameters, Object Testing Arena, About Dwarf Fortress, and Quit. Well, we're not going to quit yet, we just got started. We're going to be creating our new world, but we're not going to design a new world with advanced parameters. That's a little bit too fancy. We're going to go straight into Create New World. It gives us lots of options anyway. So, let's get started here and see if we can actually make a world for ourselves. So here we go. Create New World. It does get a little bit freezy when it starts to change between things, but here it is. It welcomes us to the alpha of Dwarf Fortress, which is, of course, an alpha, so it's not perfect, it's not done. It has a bunch of bugs and problems in it, but it's still a very playable game. There is also a wiki you can go to, and there's a variety of other support resources. But we're going to get straight into making our world. So we have some more options here. This is a game of options. It's menus. It's what it'll do. Well, I'm going to tell you what you do, and you do these things. World size determines how big your entire world map is. It's not the end of the world, haha, if you make it smaller or larger, but it is a persistent thing that will stay between all of your games. All of your games will happen in one world. You'll be retelling the history of that world. So, if you make it fairly large, medium is a good size, you'll actually have a variety of sites to choose from. You can actually keep playing in that one world. If you make it a pocket world, you only have a 17 by 17 grid, which might not give you all of the different locations you're looking for, whereas a medium world with an 129 by 129 grid gives you a lot more options. Now, we're going to leave it on medium because I like that size. As far as history goes, this determines your history of your world. And that is actually a big deal. Now, you can set it to be really long, which is 1,050 years. You can set it to be very short, in 5 years. We're going to set it to be short, so 125 years. And that's a reasonable length of time. The reason I'm setting it to be this length instead of medium is that it takes a long time to render up the history of your world, because it actually writes the entire history. It writes in civilizations being formed. It writes in kings and rulers and monsters who are born and fight and die. And you can actually read all of the history of your world. And, very interestingly enough, the history of the worlds you make. So you can read about your fortress if you want, after you've played through it. But we're going to leave it on short for now, so we get some history, we get some civilizations rising and falling, some people being born and dying. But we still actually have some history in our world, and it doesn't take 5 hours to run. That's an exaggeration, but still. As far as number of civilizations go, that determines, surprise, surprise, the number of civilizations in your world. The higher we set it, the more existing civilizations there will be, and the lower we set it, the fewer people there will be. The problem with that is, if there's too many, you have a higher chance of being attacked by evil races, and if you set it too low, you have a lower chance of being visited by friendly races. So we want to set it in the middle there. Medium's a pretty reasonable place to put it. As far as maximum number of sites, that determines basically how much of your world is populatable. So how much of it isn't mountains, how much of it isn't ocean. So medium is fairly reasonable. Number of beasts is a very dangerous one, however. The next two are quite nasty. Beasts. We're talking about the titans of this world. We're talking about forgotten creatures from the dawn of time. We're talking about things like titans, bronze colossuses, creatures with any number of heads, wings, and nasty appendages who breathe toxins or breathe fire and do all manner of evil things. So we can set that as high or as low as we want. Very high means you have a very high chance of getting completely murdered by horrible creatures, and very low is kind of boring, because they're never ever going to show up in your worlds. So medium is a very good place for that. As far as natural savagery goes, that determines how evil the world you're in is. So you can set it high and it will do everything it can to try and murder you horribly, or we can set it very low and it will be very peaceful. We're going to set it medium. Oops, no, that's the wrong button. Set it to medium, because if it is not set to medium, it has a tendency to be, well, a little bit too boring. We want to have some invaders happening, we want to have some horrible things, otherwise really, what's the point? We're going to come down here to the final option, mineral occurrence. Mineral occurrence, surprise, surprise, determines how many minerals there are. You can make them more common or less common, but we're going to leave them in the middle because that's really what the game was balanced around, which is fair enough. Now we have to hit Y to go. The options you might see here at the bottom of the screen, if you have actually got zoomed in enough to be able to read them, we have some numbers down here, and those are actually just the arrow keys. This game is originally meant to be manipulated with the number pad, but you can use the arrow keys for almost everything in Dwarf Fortress mode. Not so much in some of the other modes, but we'll get into that in a second. When we have to hit Y to go forward for whatever reason, so we're going to hit Y and we're going to go forward because we're happy with our options. So, here we go. And now, the world is being formed. We just watched mountains bursting from the earth. We've watched the earth slightly rise out of the ocean. We've watched all manner of things come to be. We've watched rivers being formed and lakes happen. We have watched things like the trees burst into the world. Whoa, everything's flying around as the world is being developed. Roads are being placed. Legends are happening. Wildlife is filling the terrain. All manner of this world is being created. As this world happens, you can see things on the map which actually designate things which are there. For example, this little shape here is a tower, I believe. There are things like roads being driven across the world here as people populate this planet. We're 70 years into the age of myth, with 12,000 historical figures born, 2,500 dead, and upwards of 50,000 events already occurring. We have all kinds of things here. We have villages down here, probably a human settlement. We have things in the mountains. We have all kinds of things coming into being. So this world will soon be created. Apparently one new region has already been rejected, so that's an interesting little thing. It created a world that couldn't actually populate. So let's see what happens here. There's dwarves building in the mountains. As their roads come across the land, we can see all kinds of things happening. Things are developing in this early world. Yes, indeed. We're already 100 years into our history, and as the history gets longer, the history years go by slower because there's more historical figures and more events to calculate, because we're already up to 100,000 at 100,000 events at 100 years in. As the game jumps around to different parts of the continents, different parts of the world, we can see different things. We have purple areas here, which are really, really nasty. Those are areas of terror. Those are where things have gone really horribly wrong. And I'll get to that in a minute. We have other things here. We have other civilizations, quite large ones too, in fact, over here and over there. We've got some little islands here with some different forts in them and whatnot. Some towers, roads being built between the rivers. All kinds of things are going on here as the world populates itself and creates the things that are going to be going on around it. We can actually jump into it, and things from these nearby places will come to us. So this is actually an important part of the world. As the ages go by, it actually affects what happens in the game we play. So, we're getting close here to the end of the time we've set to happen, reaching year 125, and once that occurs, we will have our world. There we go. It has finalized the civilizations, has put in, has named things, and I can take a look at our world. This is it. This is the world. Here it is. It's quite big. We can look around it. I'm looking around quite fast because I'm holding down Shift, which jumps at big chunks at a time. We can look around our world. It's a big place. We have a lot of things to look at down here, but we're going to look at them in a minute once we actually go looking on where to embark in our world. But for now, we're just going to accept what we have here and move into the world we've made. So also, by the reason, one thing to explain first. The game, at this size at least, builds you from the equator to one of the poles. So what we have here is the equator at the top of the world with things like the deserts and things near the middle. There's no heat-related names, apparently. The odorous dunes, the prairies of touch. These are the names of these places that we're looking at. The Tower of Stokers, apparently. And as you get down lower, you come closer and closer to the South Pole. It can be reversed. It can be the North Pole down to the equator, but in this case, it's equator down to South Pole. And here we have the Arctic. We have things like the tundra, where the murky blizzard is what this place is called. Oops. We're going to save that world. There we go. I pushed the wrong button. That's okay. We want to save the world anyway, so we can get moving. And it's going to build this world for us into a way we can actually use it later. A place we can actually go into. And we'll be able to explore it in a little bit more detail in a second, because there's a lot more information about these locations that we'll be able to look at. Yes, indeed. So as it saves all our historical figures, all of our legends, we'll be able to move forward in a moment. But for now, we're going to have to wait one quick second, and I'll be right back to work a little bit more on what happens next. Alright, so let's get started on this thing. Let's get our game a-playin'. So here we go. Hit start playing, and we have three options here. Apparently our world is now called Amethicamade. That's a pretty interesting world name. Amethicamade. Amethicamade? Amethicamade? I don't know. Amethicamade. That's what it's called now. Welcome to Amethicamade. Now we have three options, like I said. We can play Dwarf Fortress mode, which is what we will be playing, which is our classic mode where we actually build our fortress, have dwarves, and do magnificent adventures. Adventurer mode, where you create a hero, explore the world, kill monsters, and explore ruins, which is also fairly interesting from what I've seen, but nothing I've really gotten into. When I played this, I originally played on my laptop, so I only had access to the arrow keys, and Adventurer mode really needs the number pad in order to be actually played. So that didn't work out so well for me. We also have Legends mode. Let's take a quick peek in here so we can see what this is all about, and then we'll get back into Dwarf Fortress mode, which is really our meat and potatoes. So when this world was made, Legends mode was formed, which is literally basically an archive of everything that happened in the history of this world. We can look at the historical figures who are in it, we can look at the sites, artifacts, and regions, we can look at the age of myth and all the everything that happened in it. So if we were to say look at our civilizations, we can see there are all these different places. If we go down to one of them, let's look at Sigun Ram, the Tours of Prison. We look here, we can see that they're a dwarven civilization of the Windy Realms, and we can literally see everything they ever did. We can see their foundations, some of the fights they had. We had a cougar who became an enemy of them. We had a giant cave spider who became one of their enemies. We can scroll down further. This might be a little bit hard to look at. I apologize for that. We're going to scroll down here a little bit, see what else happens down later in their history. We had the Gloom Horror Consort, Yawo Flower Vised, becoming an enemy of them. We had an offer of peace from the Whiskers of Yore. All manner of things going on here. We can literally look at every single event in their history. Anything happening here? There's a big event here. In the mid-spring of 76, the Tours of Prison attacked the vegetation of cobras. Interesting. all kinds of wars happen, all kinds of leaders die, new people take over, they found new cities, the civilization does all kinds of things, builds roads, and you can literally look at all of it. You can look at the lives of particular people as well. If we come back out here, we can look at historical figures. We can look at a single person's history, the people they've killed, the people they've talked to, the people they've met, all that stuff. Not talked to, but that kind of thing. Very interesting histories, but it's very reedy. So we're going to get back out of here, get into our actual game. But we're still not going to be playing everything quite yet. So once this loads up, we'll be able to take a look at it, and I'll show you a little bit what our game is going to be looking like. So here we are. This is our embarkation screen, let's say, where we choose our fortress location. I know it's a little bit overwhelming again here too, but this is what this game is all about. Text, lots of pictures, and not having any idea what's going on. So we have our little tiny map here. This shows us exactly where we will actually be setting up. These are the elements of the map that will be in our game. This here is a zoomed out map of where that region is. So this whole square makes up this whole square. And by moving around the map, we can change what's on that square. We can actually see the world we're in. As we move around, the little left square moves, and that shows us what's happening. This area on the right is the entire world reduced down. So we have the Arctic areas down here up to the equator at the top, and the various different things that are in it. Looks like there's a lot of dwarves in these mountains. Let's take a look over there. We can use shift to move around more quickly on the map. We come over here to the mountains. These are definitely dwarven mountains. We have a dwarven city of Zazdakost in there. There's all kinds of things going on in this place. But we're going to take a look at the section on the right here, because this is the interesting, useful information area. Now what we got here is the name of the place. This is the Mirthful Forests. It is a temperate conifer forest, and that actually does matter, because the things that you'll find in an area depends on the kind of area it is. It is a temperate zone, which we'll talk about in a second. It is heavily forested, it has some thick vegetation, it is calm, it has a stream in it, and it has these resources in it. Now, we'll go through these one at a time, explain kind of what they're about, and what they do to your game. So, we're going to look around here. We'll start up at the north of our map. Here we are in the deserts, the heroic field, the tropical savanna, and it is scorching hot. Temperature is what we're looking at here. Closer to the equator you get, the hotter it gets. And as things get hotter, it gets harder to find things like plants, it gets harder to find things like water. Water tends to just evaporate almost immediately on the surface. You can only find it underground, which can make some things more difficult. And if it gets really, really hot, things can actually start melting, which is never a good idea. Although it generally doesn't happen on the surface, because, well, that would be weird. What else can we find? As we move down, we find other different temperature ranges. Hot, where you still won't find much water, but you will find some more vegetation generally. You can move down lower until we find warm. Warm is a nice temperature range for us. We'll probably look and find some warm areas to play in, because warm means that you generally don't get any freezing. If we go any down further, we'll find temperate regions, where you get a sort of summer-winter cycle, where stuff freezes for about half the year, or less, depending on how warm it is there. We can keep down moving further, where we get into the cold regions eventually. And once we get into a cold region, we're not finding too many of the cold regions here. This is a very warm map, apparently. The cold regions, wow, there's a lot of temperate, not a lot of cold here. Anyway, cold has a lot more freezing, generally having most of the year being frozen over. And then we get down to the very bottom here. There's no freezing? There's some freezing. Freezing is permanently frozen over, so it's really, really cold there. It's a very warm map, though. There's not a whole lot of freezing areas, which is generally not that bad. It means there's more places we can actually embark on. Let's take a look at the next stat down there. Trees, heavily forested or not, the vegetation being thick or not, that's generally fairly obvious. If you're in a forest, there's going to be a lot of stuff like that. If you're in a desert or in a swamp, you might not find as much other stuff. If you're in a mountain or something, you probably won't find any trees. You can't embark in mountains anyway, but that's the idea. Now, the next stat is one of the important ones, surroundings. That determines how hostile the world you're in is. There's a whole range of 9 different hostility levels, moving from something like calm to natural to wilderness, wilderness being somewhat dangerous on the calm side of things. There's also untamed wilds, which is what we're looking for. It's the mildly dangerous center area. So there is some dangerous elements, but it's not going to be throwing everything at you all the time. You can't tell calm and untamed wilds areas apart on the map. You just have to look at the data. What you can tell, however, is the third level. The third level is these pink areas, and they have names like Terrifying, Haunted, and there's a third one as well, which I can't remember the name of at the moment, but that's okay. Basically, these are where things are looking nasty for you. Things are evil in these places. In more ways than one. You get some of the most terrifying creatures attacking you here. These are generally areas that have been attacked with necromancy. There's necromantic energies everywhere you look, which means that when things die, they come right back again as zombies, including your own dwarves. And generally, things are just pretty darn evil in terrifying zones. Terrifying is the worst of the lot. Now, what we're looking for is based around two remaining factors. One of them being whether or not there's a stream or a river, because that gives us a nice source of water we can use, and these resources here on the right-hand side. We're looking for a couple different things. We're looking for somewhere that has some soil, because that means we can start some farming with it. We're looking for somewhere that has shallow metals and deep metals, because that means we have access to some of the surface metals and some of the lower ground metals. And fluxstone. Fluxstone, I believe, is things like limestone, which doesn't do much on its own, but we can use it in the process of making steel. So that'll be very good for our metal industry. So we need to find something with those different details. If it has things like, you know, clay or you know, very deep soil, that's not a big deal. But the thing we also want to avoid... Oh, we just found a perfect place here. No, it's calm. It's not quite perfect. The thing we want to avoid is aquifers, because aquifers are evil. So apparently, me turning off the aquifers didn't actually save, so we have aquifers in this world, so we'll have to find somewhere with no aquifers. Yeah, so what we're looking for is soil, shallow metal, deep metal, fluxstone, river, and no aquifer. It might take us... Oh yeah, and also we're looking for warm, some kind of trees, probably woodland or heavily wooded, vegetation between moderate and dense, and we're also looking for untamed wilds. So there's a lot of different things here to look for. We can actually use find desired location, I think, and set in all the settings we want. So let's try that. We'll set the evil savagery as medium, evil is medium. That's the setting that I believe gives us untamed wilds. Savagery low gives us things like calm and that kind of thing. And savagery high gives us things like terrifying. And how evil it is gives you the range. So, it's pretty complicated, but I think what we're looking for is savagery and evil, medium and medium. We're also looking for fluxstone being yes, we're looking for aquifer being no, river being yes, shallow metals being yes, I don't really care about multiple, I just want yes, deep metals being yes, soil being yes. Let's say some. So that should give us a spot we need. I think temperature is something I forgot to put in, but that's fine. This will give us a test of how this works. It's actually searching the entire world. It hasn't found anywhere yet. That's interesting. You can see it working on the right-hand side here as it tries to find somewhere for us. It may have found somewhere. I found one site that had something like it, but it's in a terrifying zone, so that's not exactly ideal. It'll keep working until it finds some more for us, and it's still not finding anything. Even that's without the temperature setting. Interesting. There's just not a lot of places that have these things for us. Wow. Really? Oh, there's some over there. Maybe we'll find something over on that little island then, or that peninsula. Because, wow, we've searched almost the entire world here, and we've only found 3 possible places that aren't in a terror zone. So, oh, there's some more. Okay, that one's up in the scorching heat, though. We don't really want to be up there. But this is probably a good place over here. So we can go look at those specific environments and see what we can find over there. There's 3 over here and 3 over there. That look pretty good for us. And we may as well stop the search. It's going to finish in a second, though, so we'll let it do that, and we'll take a look at the map ourselves. And there we go. It has searched the entire map, and it's found a couple possible sites for us. So we're going to go look at them. We should be able to move around the map now. If I undo the search, they should stay blinking. Yes, they do. Fantastic. So we're almost right on top of one of them. We're going to come over here and take a look over here at these ones, because I like being over on this little island. Oh, no, it's not connected to the mainland. That's not half as much fun. Let's come back over here, then. Is this in the mountains? Well, this is in a haunted area. That's no good. I guess these black areas are haunted, too? Oh, it's red. That's why. Well, this is a really bad idea. Embarking right next to a haunted zone is just asking for trouble. That's unfortunate. I don't know why it says that's good, though, because it doesn't have everything we asked for. Maybe it does in the area somewhere, like if we were to move around, because if you look in this left-hand screen here, we have rivers and we have our little block. This block is where we'll actually be embarking, but if we use U, H, M, and K, we can move that block around. Ah, yeah, see, here's what we're looking for. If we move the block around, we can find an area that actually has exactly what we're looking for. It means there's something in that space that actually has it. So if we were to find that exact spot, then we'd be golden. I'm not entirely sure where that is. I hit the wrong button there. Don't want to save a note. Thank you very much. There's a lot of wrong keys you can hit playing this game that'll try and do things that aren't exactly what we want. So you know what? I'm probably going to have to go look a little bit more in person until we find our embarkation location. And when I do, we'll be right back. So until then, here we go. Alright, so that was a pain in the butt right there, that was. But as soon as I went back, I realized the problem was the aquifers, so I went back, fixed the aquifer problem being actually turned off this time, remade a new world with no aquifers, and immediately found what I was looking for. So here, right over this spot here, is perfect. We have a spot here that is warm, heavily forested, thick vegetation, untamed wilds, with a brook, with deep soil, shallow metals, deep metals, and flux-stone. Perfect to me. That's exactly everything we're looking for. So we're going to start in this location. This is going to be where we set up our Dwarf Fortress in the Copper Forests, a temperate broadleaf forest. This world is named a little bit different. This is the domain of prophecies now. This is, I forget the exact name, it's like Zuzugabal, something like that. We'll find out exactly what it's called in a minute, but this is going to be where we embark our base. So we're going to hit E to embark. We've picked our location. You can actually change the size of the square as well if you use capital U, M, H, and K, but we're not going to do that. We're going to leave it the same size because that means it's not going to be too laggy for us. That's exactly good. And we're going to embark right here. And now it asks us if we're sure we want to embark here, because this is our only warning. Well, we're going to embark here. This is exactly what we were looking for. And I apologize for having to remake the world, but sometimes you gotta figure out exactly what's going on there, and I did want to show off some of these things for you guys. Now, unfortunately, we're going to have to stop this episode here for now. I know, we're so close to being in the game, but there's a lot of getting into it that needs to happen first, so it does take some time. And even then, next episode's going to be a little bit of more figuring out before we actually get started, but don't let that stop you. This has been Vanguard of Valor, getting into, very slowly, Dwarf Fortress. And I know it's been a bit of a handful, a lot of reading and explaining going on, but hopefully you found it useful and helpful, and if you've liked the video, I'd really appreciate it if you liked the video. Now, thanks for watching everyone, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.